Thank you, everyone. I think you are having a good time with the Databricks Summit. And so I'm Rajan. So I head the technology for Infosys, primarily on the data analytics and AI. And today we are going to talk about how to scale and democratize agentic AI. Taking a pragmatic approach. Okay, based on our experience, and as well, what are the things that needs to be how to approach it actually, right? While there are plethora of technologies and other aspects, but how do we approach it, and what kind of solution approach that you need to take, and then as well the reference, how is the reference blueprints, and then as well, if time permits, I'll try to accelerate with the demo as well. One of the critical aspect, we all know that AI is not something new, and AI been there for a while. But before that, the focus was mostly around the automation and digital. That's where the digital era, data era, cloud era. These were all parallel threads that are going on, and AI has been there even before that, right? What has get it really translated after the transformer 3.0 is primarily, you have now the opportunity for the multimodal data, and then enterprise AI is another major thing that is got, how do you bring AI at an enterprise scale? And of course, due to the compute hungriness, there is also, we see the quantum, and then agentic AI, and then the cloud AI foundation, right? And now what we are seeing is, it's no more, it's not going to be a linear approach. It is going to take a non-linear approach, right? But biggest challenge still you have, and you would have seen in the keynote as well, 80% of the clients are still in the POC stage, right? How to take them to productionized scale, right? With that context, let me, one thing I would just like to talk about is, while agentic AI really caught the attention, if you really look at, it is not something that came in 2022, 2024, 2025, right? So for an example, we have been working on agents, different form of agentic framework given in 2019. And what we would like to articulate here is, what the industry is going towards is from an automation driven to more autonomous driven, right? And even if you have Microsoft or others talking about autonomous, they are not fully autonomous per se, actually. So we started with ML, then reinforcement learning with the state models. Then when the LLM came, then you had LangChain, RAG, tool orchestrations came into existence. And then we now, with the maturity of the orchestration, we are now talking about single agent to multi-agent orchestration. And now what we are seeing is, the agents will become self-learning, because if you really look at the tools are still developed. The tools are not byproduct available to you, plethora of the tools, right? So a lot of the agent needs to execute the tools. That's where the self-learning will come into play, and that is when it will really become from an autonomous standpoint, actually. What we see is, while we talk about those 80% of the clients who are still not able to get into the POC to production stage, there are really, these are the barriers that are going to be very critical for an enterprise to really, unlock, right? To really see the outcome of, when you want to really talk about production scale, first of all, you need to have a productivity in terms of how you are able to launch multiple apps, multiple agents at the same time, right? And then the performance, not only the technical performance holistic, and then the precision, right? Because you are not in a consumer AI, you are talking about an enterprise AI. So you need to have more than 90% and above. And though the evaluations and other things are evolving, but typically this is a very complex problem for a widest adoption. Then, of course, production has multiple layers. One is a governance at the data layer, one is governance at the AI layer, one is governance at the agentic layer, right? Because if you take agent as a human, I might not have access to approve a $3,000 bill, right? But how do I really handle agent not going what it's not supposed to do? How do you manage agent like a human? That's where production comes into play. And the price point, right? Because that is where the cost and the quality and the real value delivery. When it comes to the three critical points that I would really touch upon is, The biggest challenge that enterprise that which we see are having, and that's why most of the POCs are not going, is there is no very clear measurement and there is no clear prioritization frameworks, right? The second aspect is if you have a workflow and then you are trying to change that workflow into agentic workflow, you will not be successful. So you might need to re-engineer and reimagining the workflow. And when it comes to the data, the biggest challenge that we are going to have is now we are talking about multimodal data, right? Multimodal data, how do you still harness the knowledge from the multimodal data? How do you connect with the multimodal data? How do you do the semantic resolutions? Because enterprise semantics will be different from what you have the general knowledge, right? So for an example, I might say car operations or shipment operations in a generic term, but for my company, that might be a different term. I might use a different term. How do you bring that into way? And then the metadata. Because a lot of times if you see a lot of these demos, they have the larger, say, hey, you give the goal, you give the definition, but again, you are relying on the tribal knowledge, right? So the metadata I'm talking about not only for the data, but how much you can harness the metadata about for the agent to really understand about the tools, about the APIs, about the agent definitions itself, and in addition to that type of data. When it comes to the technology, agents are another critical aspect I would like to touch on is discoverability, right? Like if you are a human and if I give you 200 APIs, how do you select the one API to do? That's what tool calling is all about, right? Just an example. That discoverability, how do you prune? How do you give the scope of analysis? How do you give the scope? That is the one biggest challenge. Those are the blockers. In addition to the people, it is not about the learning skill, it is about the mindset, right? How do you help them to change the mindset? For an example, they shouldn't really look at agentic AI like a chat application, but they should really look at how they can cross leverage it, for their amplification and what they need to, the awareness learning, because the biggest learning is, it is not a deterministic system. It is a probabilistic system. So it needs to learn over a period of time, and you have to put the right constraints towards it. So that is where this is going to be very critical. With that, the way how we would like to approach this is, see, you need to have a very pragmatic approach that covers, starting from the top. Primarily, you should have a strategy in terms of taking care of the prioritization, taking care of measurement, taking care of, the gating for the agents to come. The second part is responsible by design. That means there are, beyond technology, what are the typical, even you might have a lot of those observability tools, but how you are going to create those policies, how we are going to curate those policies, and then thinking the data and AI governance together. From a technology standpoint, how do you really going to get the multimodal data? It is not about bringing all the data together, but what data that you bring in, what data that you leave in as is. The second part is the domain framework for all your agentic AI and other, and then creating like a factory model. That is where it is going to really help you to scale with, of course, with the reimagining of the businesses. Now, what I would like to do is, I would like to take some of those experiences to peel one by one, because these are all what we have seen in an enterprise. First and foremost, when you are envisioning an agent, right, the biggest challenge is if somebody tells you, I have 500 agents or 200 odd agents, that means, you are actually going to get into a wrong path. So you need to have the balance of quality and the quantity. The way we have approached and what is the best practice that we would like to cover is, you should treat the left-hand side as personas or an expert or a specialist, like say on a data or coding or business analysis or content generation or decision management, right? And then you have a process where it is not a supervisor, but they are a domain expert who they are like a navigators. They know whom to navigate, how to navigate, what are the guardrails, right? This kind of an approach. So typically what we have seen is, if you have 20 to 30 odd expert agents, that should suffice to cover majority of your functions if you take 2 or 3 functions. The challenge what people confuses with tools, with agents, and then with the automation. So they'll say ticket analysis is an agent, which is not technically true, right? So that this kind of a thinking with the right model approach is going to be very critical for you to scale with the multimodal data foundation and engineering, enterprise AI foundation, where you bring ML, LLM, all those things. And then as well, the agentic foundation for orchestration with the governance and your own domain LLM is going to be very critical. Where the domain LLM or domain language model going to be critical is, you don't really need a super model for everything, and you cannot have one monolithic model to solve like GPT 4.0 or Omni to start everything. So you need to pick and write compositions to really get there. Now, this addresses how do you select the agent, how do you categorize the agent. Look at it like recruiting an individual for your organization, right? When you recruit, what kind of job description, what is the organizations that they are coming to the play. The second major part is, the biggest challenge that you make is, business will end up adopting, sometimes they say, hey, I have ServiceNow gives me this agent, okay, let me go with ServiceNow. So how do you balance that agility at the same time the scale? So what we have seen always work is, the enterprise capabilities and scale at core is going to be very critical, where you templatize these. When I talked about the multimodal data, when I talk about this specialist agent and the expert agent, create that core team where they can create as a capability, as a platform, as a service, which gives you the agility and the speed for your spokes, which are your edge. Because what this will happen is, when you have picked the right use case or a right business problem to solve, for example, you built a knowledge agent, then if there are 20 other similar functions comes into play, you don't need to build 20 different agents. You can manifest the same thing to 20, because then only the scale is going to come, then only the democratization going to come, then only the standardization going to come, and that's where your cost to quality will be same actually. With that, what kind of architectural approach that you need to take? This is, if you see on the left-hand side, this is the way how today people really operate in terms of tool calling with model, with the data and other thing. What we are suggesting is that what we really mean by data.ai compound system is, you have to create a composable solution approach where you have to compound it with multiple solutions, particularly when you really talk about, take a data-centric approach where you create what we call as a data and AI mesh architecture. And this is a new evolution of an architecture where you are bringing in the data to create a knowledge corpus for your enterprise, which is curated, and then as well as creating an agentic mesh, because there are certain agents where you want to have an IP you build. There are certain agents which you might leverage Salesforce, or you might leverage SAP, or you might need your partner, right? How do you really create that mesh? And then the last aspect is, wherever you have your IP, contextualize your models into your IP. That's what we call as domain language models, to really increase the precision, reasoning, and then grounding it and all those things for that matter. Now, from a data standpoint, what we really look at is, see, for you to really do the multimodal data, you have to now use, it's a two-way scenario, right? AI needs data, but data also needs AI for it to really create it as a multimodal data product. That's what we mean by multimodal data product. Where this is going to be critical is, most of the time today, most of the enterprises are still spending time on the foundation, right? Lot of times when you want to ground the model, lot of your features, lot of your analytical KPIs, lot of your measures is what helping the model to do the reasoning. So it is critical for you to realize this multimodal data product as a thing with where you bring the governance into play, as well as think all your data as an asset. And then this second aspect is, if you really look at, create that AI-powered data management, right? So what I mean really by that is, how do you create that unified catalog? How do you create the multimodal data engineering, right? Which will help you to people to access and query the data. And people are talking about MCP. The biggest challenge that you will face with MCP is, because MCP is going to, it is like a protocol which will help you to enable how to communicate, right? But how to discover, that comes from your data. What type of samples that you need to give, that comes from your data. So it is very critical for your, even if you are exposing with MCP, having this kind of a multimodal data products and expose it as a access with similar templates are going to be critical. Second aspect is don't apply your BI data modeling techniques here. The reason is your AI or ML will, AI, particularly Gen AI and agent will confuse, because most of your BI data models are very deterministic. But what you need to have is, you need to harness the common analytics features and then allow AI to discover through your metadata. Those are the very critical thing from a data standpoint. Third important thing is, most of your multi-agent orchestration, people talk about what is there in the right-hand side, right? That they will say hierarchy of agents, right? Hierarchy of agents. There is for an enterprise, that model will not work. That's what we call it as an agentic mesh, right? Why that model doesn't work? If you take procurement as an example, if you take direct, indirect, within indirect, what goes into human capital, what doesn't go into human capital, right? There are a lot of checks and balances an enterprise has. When you go hierarchical, right, supervisor-based model, what happens is you are putting entire thrust on the supervisor node. The supervisor node has to decide which task that it needs to perform. But typically, if you really work today, we as a human work like a network. That is what, when we design the system, wherever we design for our clients, where it went scale, we went with a network-based approach. And this is one of the IP that we have built, and this is open in a way that you can use any framework, LangGraph or anything, but the advantage that it gives you is to realize this network-based thing, and as well it takes care of discovery of tools very easily, discovery of your skills very easily, and then as well gives you a scope in which you have to do, because you and me as a job descriptions, we work with certain roles and responsibilities. We will not step ahead with the rest, like we will do 10 things. When an approval comes beyond $3,000, then I have to delegate it or I have to supervise to somebody else, right? So how do you define the scope? That is why you need to have a network-based model. So this mesh kind of a model will allow where each one will be self-autonomous to understand, and then they will be able to orchestrate, as well as they will be able to share the memory temporal context as well as the long-term context. With keeping this in mind, we have created this blueprint, and this blueprint, we have also realized it in Databricks surround with Mosaic and Databricks. And if you really look at from top to bottom, what we have done is, the top bottom really addresses the multimodal data, how you create the knowledge corpus, how do you create the knowledge access, both for bringing in the data together. The second layer is actually setting up your ops. The reason I'm talking about unified ops is, for an example, agent model orchestration is, you would have seen from Microsoft talking about model router, but that router is still not going to address, right? Because you might have different type of models for different scenarios, for different personas. How do you need to build? You need to think all those things and build that. And then the second layer is your AI agent management, which will realize these agent templates that I talked about, right? I just gave you some samples, but it could be multiple things. But how that mesh going to give you the experience, that experience could be where you can mesh one of the agents from, as I said, Salesforce or others. But the other side also is like where your digital canvas or a workspace canvas for your enterprise, that is where your AI experience will come into play. And then the model foundry, what you are going to build, and that is where we are also leveraged Mosaic is, use this knowledge corpus and use like DSPY and others to ground the model based on your knowledge corpus, based on your evaluations, right? So that when I talk about shipping operations, I am talking about shipping operations for my enterprise, which I have reimagined, right? And this kind of a blueprint, and when you build it as a capability, you don't need to do everything, but when you do with this vision and build it as a capability, that is when what happens is you will be able to measure, and also you will be able to deliver the value quickly to the business. And what we have done is, as part of Infosys, the reason why we call it as a workbench is because we have tools and infrastructures that are really coming into play, but we built it as a composable asset in line with our construct, so that when you are really using it on Databricks on AWS, Databricks on Azure, as an example, or GCP or anywhere, or Polycloud, we bring these composable assets to really realize that blueprint, and as well as with all the other consulting assets like prioritization frameworks and others, which will help you to drive the value much faster. I just like to quickly do a demo. So in the interest of time, so here I have taken, this is a use case. What we have done is for a drug analysis in the case of pharmaceuticals, where you have a knowledge about clinical, what happened to the clinical, what type of clinical, as well as you have a structured data. And here what we are trying to do is, the first example is, in the similar thing, we have, this is talking about the knowledge aspect, where it got the knowledge, and all these are templatized. And where in the interest of time I would like to really focus is, so if you see here, this is what I mean by agentic mesh. Sorry, it got, so if you really look at the drug analyzer, what we have done is, we have brought in the multiple agents, and this kind of explainability and traceability and how you design based on the reason is going to be very critical, grounding on your knowledge corpus, because this is when the business will get a confidence in terms of why they are taking a decision and how they are taking decision and how the model has really reasoned to really get there actually, And you can see a deep dive demo in our booth, in our Infosys booth. And these are the couple of clients. This is for one of the one of the products, food products company, largest CPG, where we are able to create 10 different agents for the various supply chain and demand generation functions. Similarly, for a global manufacturing firm, where we brought in a unified data platform as well as an AI twins using this model. And what we are seeing is, this gives them the driving the adoption and scaling the agentic AI democratized at an enterprise level. With that, I think you visit our booth, and we can have a deep dive demos and the chats basically. Thank you.